Huey, Dewey, and Louie make their first appearance in the Disney animated short Donald's Nephews. The USS Enterprise is commissioned and a 450 metric ton meteorite explodes about 12 miles above the Earth near Shakora, Pennsylvania. The year is 1938, and this was the first full year Howard Dutch Darrin would build his elegant Packard Darrin, which was only available through his studio. But before getting into all of it, I'm your host, Jay. Welcome to What It's Like, the automotive channel that shows you cars like you've never saw them before. All the lines and details that you don't get to see from far away. History, specs, design, with engine episodes peppered in. If any of that sounds of interest to you, subscribe and hit the bell icon next to it to never miss a video. 1938 Packard model lineup was broken down into the 16 series, which was the Packard 6, formerly known as the 115C, just now called the 1600, followed by the 128 series. Both the 1606 and the 128 were junior models. The senior models was the 17 series Super 8 and the 17 series 12. Howard Dutch Darrin, the man behind the design, was born in 1897 in Cranford, New Jersey. We are going to be on a first name basis with Howard Dutch Darrin because it will get confusing later on talking about the Darrin car. Howard was a World War I U.S. pilot who served in France, where he would meet Thomas Hibbard. Both Thomas and Howard were employed by Brewster and Company as designers right after the war, but they didn't stay there for very long. Thomas would take Howard to Paris, France to try to sell LeBaron designs. They went to Paris because manufacturing costs were lower, and they would set up shop in Paris under the name Hibbard and Darren. In 1923, the partnership would end. In 1931, Thomas would go back to the U.S., getting a job as a designer with General Motors. Howard would remain in France and formed a new company and a partnership with Argentina-born French banker J. Ferdinand. This company made high-end cars, best known for the 1933 Duesenberg Convertible for Gretchen Garbo. They also made a 1935 Hispano Suiza H6, commissioned for Anthony Rothschild, chauffeur-driven limousine. Howard would ultimately move back to the U.S. in 1937 and would set up his own studio on Sunset Boulevard, Hollywood, California, called Darrin of Paris, to try to capitalize on the image of love and romance, style, and beauty of French cars in the late 1930s. Custom-built, coach-built cars were few and far between. Most of the big manufacturers either bought out the coach builders, like General Motors bought Fisher Body clear back in 1919, but they had some lingering stock purchases that were all purchased by 1926. Briggs Body purchased LeBaron in 1926, and they became part of Chrysler Corporation in 1953. So the market for custom coach-built cars was still there, but limited. Think of it like the manual transmission now. It's still a really cool concept. There's lots of people that still like driving manual transmission cars, but it's getting few and far between. Hell, there's not a whole lot of people that really like driving cars anymore in general. Most people would rather just have the car autopilot them to wherever they need to go. And to them, I say, why don't you just take the bus? It would be a whole lot cheaper, but I digress. Howard Darrin would sell his first Darrin, Packard Darrin, in 1937 to actor Dick Powell. According to Richard M. Langworth, other sources will say that Clark Gable got the first one. It's important to note that the early Darrins were more or less hand-built in a building that Howard rented, and they wasn't produced by Packard. Packard would offer them as a catalog offering built by Packard, but that wasn't until 1940. So all of the Darrins built before 1940 were essentially hand-built. The car wasn't without its teething issues. The body experienced flexing, especially in the cowl region, which was corrected with a cast aluminum cowl. The cowl was also made of cast aluminum to deal with water leaking issues. The 1937 through 1939 Darrins were considered semi-custom cars built on the Junior 8 aka 120 series chassis, and sources conflict on the amount of cars built, but I saw one was built in 1937, 8 in 1938, Richard M. Langworth claims that there's around 20 built between the years of 1937 through 1939. As previously mentioned, all of the cars built from 1937 through 1939 were built on the 120 chassis. But when Packard got involved and they built the cars from 1940 through 1942, they were both offered on 120 and the Super 8 chassis, and they were built in the Auburn plant in Connersville, Indiana. But it's important to note that they never made a 6-cylinder Darrin, and they never made a Darrin 12, which is super interesting. All the early Darrins were marketed towards movie stars, actors, singers, people in the entertainment business. All of the Darrins have history, and this car is no exception. Our featured car was originally purchased by Sally Rand, who was a burlesque dancer and actress, most famous for her ostrich feather fan dance and balloon bubble dance. Her birth name was Helen Beck, but she went by other names as well during her career, which included but not limited to Billy Beck, Helen Beck, Sally Rand, Hattie Beck. Helen started off life early as a chorus girl. Her first performance working at the Empress Theater in Kansas City at the age of 13. And during the 20s, she would appear in silent films. And that's where she would get the name Sally Rand. The name was given to her by Cecile B. DeMille, who was inspired by Rand McNally Atlas. She became a dancer after performing in silent films. Sally would purchase this car new in 1938. Not much is known about the car during the time that Sally owned it, but it was originally cream color, and the color was changed when it became part of the John Obama collection. He obtained the car in 1965 from a young businessman from Independence, Missouri. The restoration didn't happen until 1991, and it lasted until 1996. It's believed that the color change was advice from Dutch Darrin himself. Perhaps he gave the advice before he died because Howard Dutch Darrin passed away in 1982. Let's talk specs. It rides a wheelbase of 127 inches. It weighs 3,630 pounds. Price, $1,650, which would be equivalent to you spending $36,932.50 in the year 2025, an absolute bargain for a semi-custom car. Total 1938 Packard production, and I'm getting all these numbers from the Packard history of the motor car and the company. 50,200 units, of which 13,492 were the 6, 8,992 were the 120, 1,865 were the Super 8, and only 166 Packard 12s were made. And of all of those numbers, there's only said to be 8 Darrin convertible Victorias built for the 1938 model year. I wonder if they all survive. If you know, put it in the comment section below. It is powered by a 282 cubic inch displacement flathead inline 8, 4.6 liters. It's good for 120 horsepower at 3,800 RPM, estimated 170 pound-feet or 230 Newton meters at 1,800 RPM, with a bore of 3¼ inch and a stroke of 4½ inches. Compression, you could have 2 different compression ratios. 6.6 was the standard. Optional was 7.05, 5 main bearings. This one is backed with a 3-speed synchro mesh transmission with overdrive, 4-wheel hydraulic brakes. Fun fact, junior Packard models got hydraulic brakes first back in 1936. The senior cars had to wait until 1938 to get hydraulic brakes. Before that, they were using vacuum assist. Let's talk styling on this absolutely gorgeous Packard Darrin. Starting with the bumper, notice it has a channel in the middle of the bumper going back towards the bumperettes, which have all this cascading effect. There are 2 bumper bars that override. This car has amber fog lights. Just take a look at that beautiful grille that's thermostatically controlled. Bright beads that protrude going up. There's a Darrin script up towards the headlight bucket, which has a nice bezel around it, and the bucket itself is painted with a center spine or headlight fin. Just take a look at that. I personally love all of the lines and details in the Packard radiator shell going up towards donut pusher. Just look at all of the detail and design in that hood ornament design. It's just a work of art within itself. And then slowly coming back to feature and showcase this awesome grille. Headlights are mounted in pods, as previously mentioned, with the bright beads going up towards them. It all just comes together really nicely. Also notice the fenders have an ever so slight crease. This car is just drop dead gorgeous in just about every single angle you look at it. The more you look at this car, the more you see. Wheel openings are rolled. Also take a gander at the wheel covers. It says Packard 8 beauty rings and body painted color inside that rim design. The wide white walls really set this car off. Man, what a beautiful car. Low slung. Check out that windshield profile, how it rakes back. Also notice where the side mirror is placed. It's placed right on the cowl. You can see that this car has that iconic Darren dip. The door starts off higher at the base of the windshield and then slants down as it moves aft. Also notice that the door is a swan style door where the hinges are in the back, and there are 3 hinges. Taking a real quick gander at the front fender situation, it gives me 8 chord vibes. What do you think with the way that it comes back to a point in the rear of the fender? Just take a look at that profile. Man, it's such a gorgeous car. This car has a butterfly style hood where both of them open on each side. There is a trim line going from the mascot all the way up to the windshield, which covers the piano hinge. This car has a windshield very similar to an Auburn Speedster. Cowl vent is more far forward than we're used to seeing. This car has dual windshield wipers mounted on pedestals that come together. Also interesting to point out is this car doesn't have running boards. It does have a rubber gravel guard as well as fender skirts. Just look at how this design ties everything up in the rear, how the rear fenders come together with the rear bodywork. Gasoline gauge is on the driver's side. The rear brake lights are mounted to pedestals and they have this bright bezel around it. Interesting to point out that the bumper in the rear is totally different than the bumper in the front. On to the button switches and knobs, starting on the left and moving right. Coolant temperature gauge, oil pressure, 100 mile per hour speedometer with all of the numbers going the same way. Bright lights indicator at the bottom. I think the high beam switch is on the floor in the pedal box. Gasoline gauge, amp meter, headlights, starter button, lighter, key, hand throttle, radio just above that, ashtray just above that, and then off to the left is the glove box, and the clock is on the glove box door. On the positive side, low slung, that gets you every time. It's absolutely stunning car to look at. The more you look, the more you see. It uses the same Packard 8/120 interior, especially the gauges. So sourcing interior parts like the gauges and the steering wheel, they could be taken right from 120 cars. These cars are significant and full CCCA classic status, or Classic Car Club of America, as a fine, distinctive automobile that was produced between 1915 through 1948. I will link the link for Classic Car Club of America to see if you have a car that qualifies, but I believe that this is the only Packard built on a junior chassis that is considered full classic by the CCCA, so that's super interesting. Against it, said to be better to look at than drive, cramped cabin area. The back seat is next to useless because of the windshield rake. If you're tall, the frame of the windscreen could be level with your head, which isn't the most ideal place to drive the car. Water leak issues as well as chassis flex issues. All right, now it's time for Would You Rather. 2 scenarios today. In the first scenario, these aren't fair by any stretch of the imagination, but which one would you rather have? 1937 Cord 812 Phaeton or 1938 Packard Darrin Convertible Victoria, or 1937 Auburn Speedster. I'm going to leave this here for a minute. If you need more time, feel free, pause the video. I just want to leave a quick side note because I've been in all three of these cars. The 1937 Cord has the most space, both width-wise. You don't feel cramped in that car. The Auburn Speedster is an epic car, but it's a huge car, and you can only take one other person with you. And I guess the Packard Darrin is like that to an extent as well. The Cord doesn't have that big of a backseat either, but I digress. On to the second scenario. Which is your favorite Packard Darrin? The 1940 Packard Darrin 4-door, or 1938 Packard Darrin, or 1942 Clipper Darrin? And if I left out your favorite Darrin, please write yours in the comment section below. I'm going to leave this here for a minute. If you need more time, feel free, pause the video. Now it's time for Name That Tune. First person to give both the name of the band, song title, and the lyric that comes next. I'm looking for the full line that comes next. First person to do all three will have their comment pinned to the top of the comment section. She said she'd always been a dancer. I'm not a professional singer, but anyway, thank you all so much for coming out and watching this. If you'd like to get in touch with me for any reason whatsoever, shoot me a comment in the comment section below, or you could always send me an email at what_its_like@yahoo.com. Thanks for everything, and until next time, toodaloo! Welcome to the after show. This part of the video doesn't have any sound or commentary, but you can put whatever sound or commentary you wish. You get to see this car like you've never saw it before. Enjoy.